So the dialogue is mostly about conversations, but we do have two more short talks. And they're on two topics that seem to underpin so much that we're going to talk about today. This morning, Kristie L from the University of Washington, where she's a professor in the School of Public Health, is going to talk about climate change and health. So please welcome Kristie L.
I want to thank the organizers very much for the opportunity to talk with you. And the previous talk was really amazing. It's rather daunting to come up here and think, I could talk like that. But I want to give you a counter narrative to the very important facts that you heard in the last few minutes. And I want to talk about the future. The recent past a bit, but mostly about the future and how the challenges of climate change and other global environmental changes might have for our health. I want to start with a figure on the left. It's very important when we're thinking about the future, about global environmental changes, to make sure that we understand it's not just the exposures. It's not just changing temperatures. It's not just biodiversity loss. As you just heard, it's about who is most vulnerable to the exposures that are created by these changes. And understanding that when we talk about these global environmental changes, we have to look at those intersections. And so I don't focus just on the exposure, I also focus on equity. The figure on the right is one of many, many, many figures showing the kinds of changes that are ongoing. At the bottom are a range of changes in our ecosystems. These are all because of what we do collectively as humans. These then affect our infrastructure, the social determinants of health, how wealth is distributed across countries. Those then interact with a range of other issues and then affect our health systems, our ability of our health systems to manage ongoing change, and then ultimately affect our health and our well-being. I want to just give two examples of an enormous field. And so the first is talking about biodiversity loss, which is another critical change that's ongoing on our planet, again, because of human activities. And that interacts then with climate change and with infectious diseases. Of growing concern, particularly after COVID, is what's happening at this intersection of biodiversity loss, climate change, and the viruses that bats can carry. And there's lots of concern about spillover and whether the next pandemic is also going to be a spillover from bat viruses. And these are rich areas of research. There's a lot that needs to be understood. At the same time, we do know a lot. And understanding then how these intersections take place. When we look into the future, we're looking at uncertainties. There's a broad range of uncertainties. And being more effective in preparing for the future means that we should think about how we're going to manage those uncertainties as much as how we're going to manage particular changes in our environment. A recent example for those of you who are not following dengue fever. Dengue fever is a mosquito-borne disease. The mosquito that carries dengue fever also can carry Zika, chikungunya, and yellow fever. Worldwide, it's a very important mosquito. There's several different kinds of these mosquitoes. They're all under the rubric Aedes, the genus Aedes. And they're changing their geographic range. Temperatures are going up, precipitation patterns are changing, and the result is they're moving into new places. There's been some scientific work, it's called detection and attribution, about the changes, particularly in dengue in the Americas, showing that the changes are because of climate change. I've got appalling numbers on this slide, that the outbreak this year has been beyond what anybody could have expected. Last year, there was a record 4 million cases. In Brazil, in February of this year, they said Brazil might have 4 million cases alone this year. It's now over 8 million cases in Brazil. Thousands of children have died from dengue hemorrhagic fever. States of emergency were declared. These are the kinds of concerns that we have with our changing environment and the lack of preparedness in our health systems. I was a little bit nervous about putting on a slightly technical slide, but yeah, the previous slides were pretty technical, so this doesn't seem too bad. When you look at these figures, the columns are regions in the world. And I'd read them out to you, but I can't read my own slides from here. But they're regions of the world. And the top row is malaria, the bottom row is dengue. When you look at each one of these, the very middle of that vertical bar is the equator. And this is asking how long could there be transmission season for malaria, for dengue in these different world regions into the future. The colors are different emissions of greenhouse gases that come from burning coal, oil, and other fossil fuels. And just look at the patterns. This is saying that the world is ripe for more epidemics because mosquitoes, ticks are changing their geographic range. There's going to be longer transmission seasons. So far, as always happens when you talk about these kinds of issues with health, I've been focusing on one issue at a time. But as you know from looking at the world over the last year, these things happen all at once. There's floods and droughts back to back. There's heat waves, wildfires simultaneously. And those all come together to affect our health and well-being. There's a couple of examples on the right. And I'm going to move forward because I only have 2 minutes left. And to echo the theme that you just heard, inequity is at the heart of global environmental change and health. That who's causing the problems are not who's suffering the most. I appreciate the emphasis across countries. The same is true within countries. That all of our countries have people who are poor and marginalized and who suffer the most from the changes that are ongoing. For those of you who can't read the slides in the back, the figure at the top is emission of greenhouse gases. At the bottom are diarrheal diseases and undernutrition, just showing you the very different patterns across countries. And it's not all bad news. First of all of the concerns we have with a changing climate are current problems. We could strengthen our health systems to make sure that we're prepared for them. There's lots that can be done on the preparedness side. On the side of reducing global environmental change, the very good news story is reducing emissions of fossil fuels, reducing the deforestation that's going on, can strongly benefit our health. And this goes into a lot of detail of all the benefits for health. We know that coal-fired power plants emit lots of air pollution, causes allergies, asthma, premature death. You reduce those, you reduce these avoided hospitalizations or avoidable hospitalizations, avoidable premature deaths. And understanding that means that we have more incentive to take action. This is an iconic figure from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change showing possible global mean surface temperature changes from 1900 to 2100, and shows that going from here forward, there's 5 different visions of what those temperature changes could look like. And those depend on how rapidly the world reduces emission of greenhouse gases. And importantly, people were put on this figure for the first time, that our future is going to depend, our individual future, and our family, our friends, and colleagues on what happens in terms of reducing those emissions. Finally, about 85% of the health risks of climate change are in children. I live in the United States. You say climate change, people think about polar bears. I hope you walk away from this and remember it's the children that are being affected. Thank you.